next we have Jase with Post-Mortem Forensics telling the story of a breach.
Alright guys, thanks for welcoming me. This is my first convention talk outside of kind of school-sponsored events. And I guess we still don't have video here. I got it. I think I need to just change the settings here. Yeah, this is right at the height that ceiling fans get scary, so not even the microphone works for me. Cool. So again, thanks for welcoming me. This is my first time speaking at a conference, so be easy. So who am I? I'm Jase by day. I'm a consultant. Do incident response stuff, pen test things. Company's worst day is usually my happiest day. Not to be mean, but that's what makes my job interesting. The day I discovered 15,000 compromised endpoints, that was a good day. The day I got 1,700 shells in 24 hours, that was a really good day. By night, I'm an active member of DC 562. I do security conferences, never stop learning. So what this talk is not about is like how to prepare a company's, for a breach investigation, or, the policy side, the legal side of incident response, remediating a network post-breach, not going into memory forensics. That's a really wide topic to cover in the scope of this presentation. And I'm not going into Linux or Unix forensics either. Again, those could be their own presentations. I want to keep this somewhat at a high level, and I want to make it so that more wide of an audience is able to understand and benefit from the content of this presentation. So what it will be is the high-level overview of where you might look on a Windows system when faced with the discovery of a malicious actor in your environment, or multiple. Sometimes I'm investigating a breach and there's multiple actors in the environment, all on different missions. So I'm also going to cover how to investigate efficiently by hunting smart, and some specific use cases that commonly apply to incident response, and some tricks I've learned along the way. So some of those are documented in the slides. Some of those I'll just bring up as they come to mind. So forensics this, forensics that. A quick introduction. There's some terms that are thrown around, like post-mortem forensics, dead box forensics. Generally means like you have a system image, the system's offline, and it's been copied. There's also live or triage forensics, which is something that is being used a lot more these days. Generally, the system's still on. You potentially have it on a live network. It's still sending data. And there's also e-discovery forensics. E-discovery forensics is more focused on capturing lots of data, or all the data, from every system in a company for litigation purposes. And while it didn't have a forensic, it was more about file enumeration and document enumeration, et cetera. Back in the day, it is actually using a lot more forensics to try to parse out deleted files and gather stuff. But generally, e-discovery forensics doesn't involve like following a timeline of activity or pivoting off of artifacts. It's more for litigation purposes. So in the world of forensics, you're going to hear these three terms used. And when you think of traditional computer forensics, post-mortem analysis is often what comes to mind. Post-mortem analysis kind of has its roots in like law enforcement, civil and criminal cases, and some consider incident response more of like a live forensics capability, especially since chain of custody is often less of a concern. Some IP comes out of the Netherlands, like who you're gonna arrest. And additionally, speed is of the essence in these cases, because with live forensics, it's much quicker than taking disk images. You don't have to basically ship drives around. It's actually a huge pain to deal with some of these companies that get breached, and they have to figure out like how are we going to get data from that data center or that remote site. So live forensics really has become a thing due to necessity. It's not reasonable to gather all these massive disk images and store them where, right? So yes, an important part of live forensics, a big reason why it exists too, is volatile data collection. So memory, network connections, this and that. Again, out of the scope of what I'm going to be presenting on today. So, live forensics is great. It's quick, you can scope things, but the longer a system's online and running, whether it's live forensics tools running or whether it's normal operations running, the higher chance of forensic artifacts will, that haven't been, gathered or parsed, will have been modified or overwritten. And here's a useless chart that I put together for you that basically details, and it actually works very well. As more stuff happens, things decrease. So, basically, you've got to find that sweet spot where you can scope an incident and you can do live forensics, pull metadata off of endpoints, ultimately trying to get a disk image. So, like I mentioned, incident response can be a very complicated beast these days. You've got to apply the methodology of post-mortem forensics, like what are you going to parse, what are you going to look for if you had a disk image, and figure out how to do them, on a smaller scale across many systems. And it's all in order to scope basically a breach. But it's got to be done without pulling back too much data. Like say you pull back the entire Windows registry, it could be hundreds of megabytes. It's unfeasible if you have 100,000 systems, which is becoming the norm at companies these days. Yes, I included post-mortem forensics as the title of my talk, but I also plan to include topics on live forensics because really there's a lot of stuff that seems to be merging between these two fields or these two subsets of forensics. So let's dive into some forensic artifacts. Files that executed are a good place to start. So in Windows, there's the application compatibility engine. Basically, it's a lot of people call it shim cache, shimming up a door. It exists to prevent software in Windows from breaking due to upgrades or changes in Windows. Backwards compatibility is really the goal here, and if you've ever opened up or right-clicked the file and gone to properties and running compatibility mode for Windows XP or whatever, that's the shim engine or the application compatibility engine that runs that. And it's achieved by API hooking, redirects API calls from Windows alternative code, and then redirects to the shim code. Microsoft's Emmet, the Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit, is actually that's how it works. It uses the shimming process to protect and detect. And the thing about the application compatibility engine is even if you don't right-click a program and say run in compatibility mode for whatever, it always tracks what's executing, whether you like it or not. So it's great for forensic investigators. Some other parts of the application compatibility engine include the recent file cache. It's located in the .bcf file and the path you see up on the screen. It's usually available on Windows 8 and on. It's really a temporary storage of executed applications. They could be either classified as new programs, downloaded or copied, or the first run of a known program that was already on disk. This artifact rolls really quickly. It's volatile. It can be reset really easily. So it's not the best artifact to rely on, but I've absolutely had leads from this artifact if it's been recent to the breach. So shim cache is probably one of the more well-known artifacts of the application compatibility engine. It's located within the system registry hive. The location differs between XP 2003 and everything else. And it contains basically program execution and shim details. It's much more extensive than the recent file cache, and it's lower volatility too. So 1,024 entries, I think is all the most recent operating systems like with Vista, or I think Windows 7 and on are 1,024. Don't quote me on that. But basically, it'll store the path, the file name, the last modified timestamp of that file. Not the created, the last modified, which is useful, but it can also send you astray sometimes, which I'll go into later. And then it stores some other values which vary by operating system. So back in the XP days, it's stored, and still on XP, it still stores, like, I think the last update time of the file, but it doesn't store a flag that says whether the file executed or not. In newer versions of Windows, it doesn't store the last update time for the registry key, but it stores an execute flag, which is basically true or false. Did it execute? And now in Windows 10, they've removed that execute flag. Basically how forensics and incident response works is people reverse engineering Windows to try to figure out how is this working, because Microsoft isn't always documenting these things. When you parse shim cache, this is Mandiant's shim cache parser. It works really well. It's one of many tools out there. It was run against a system that got hit with ransomware through brute forcing over RDP, an old IT support client that I had. And you'll see this is, I think this system was a Vista or Windows, probably Windows 7. So you'll see the last update time is not there because Windows 7 doesn't store it, but you have the last modified time, the path to the file, file size is another thing that used to be stored, and the exec flag, so did it execute? This actually is a really useful artifact because if something executed, you probably want to know about it in the scope of a breach. So, anyone see anything in there that looks suspicious? Where is svc host.exe supposed to live? See Windows System 32? Yeah. So, and I'm sure that mobile chore bandbot2.exe is not good. So anyway, really useful artifact. One thing that's an actual interesting use case that I've run into several times, when I first saw it, I couldn't explain it and I kind of ignored it. And then when I saw it again, I dug into it and I found out that you have this execute flag here. And if it's an exe, it can execute. If it's a DLL, DLLs don't execute. Text files, INI files, .log, .bat, they can all show up in shim cache. Microsoft or Windows is this enigma that does things in certain ways. So, what I take away from it is that shim cache will watch what executes out of a directory, and it'll cache other files in that same directory. So actually, you can get some interesting leads when you look for batch scripts or text files or certain things in random directories that show up in shim cache. But one thing that I ran into was an INI file that had the exec flag of true. And that really was weird to me. The file was no longer on disk. The actors had erased it, clearly. Later testing revealed that if you rename an executable .pdf and you go cmd.exe/c and run it as like a child process, it'll interpret that .pdf file as an executable if it is an executable. So if you actually do some kind of clever querying, say you get all this shim cache data in a database, and you can write a query that's like, show me all shim cache entries that have an exec flag of true but are not exes. That's actually some really interesting lead-based hunting that you can do. Again, I will warn you that it's very false positive prone because random programs run as .temp files through various methods. So again, Windows is kind of a mess, but there's a lot of forensic artifacts. So another artifact that's really awesome is amcache. Again, this is an execution artifact. And it was introduced Windows 8 and Server 2012 and on. I think that it might have been backported to Windows 7 through certain versions of Windows 7 through updates, but I'm not sure. So this is the location. The crazy thing about amcache is it's like shim cache on steroids. Here's an example of like what it stores. This is an output from a script by Yogesh, awesome forensicator, does a lot of research. I think he was one of the first people to reverse engineer this artifact when it showed up in Windows. So you'll see it stores some information that may or may not be useful, like file reference, volume GID, file path, language code. But you've got the path, you've got the modified time, you've got a PE header hash. You got the file size. This is the file might not even be on disk anymore. You have this. And then you also have more stuff about the PE header, modified created time. So why having the created time is really useful is actors will often try to remote desktop into a system to blend in like they're a normal user, right? And if you copy a file through a remote desktop session, the modified time will actually stay the same. It's the created time that increments on the system it's being copied to. So having only the modified time for shim cache can sometimes be a pain because it'd be like PS exec and like the modified time is 2009 and you're like, I can't pivot off that timestamp, right? You know, an incident response, there's so many rabbit holes to go down. You've got to like find something to like hold on to, whether that's a hash, whether that's a file name, whether that's a time frame. You know, so when it comes to like glorious forensic artifacts, Amcache is there. You've even got a SHA-1 hash. It always starts with 4 zeros for some reason. I'm not sure why, so you have to cut those off. But what can you do with a SHA-1 hash? Look it up online, right? Virus total, and if you happen to have virus total intelligence access, you can download that file, run it in a VM, you know, poke at it. Very amazing value for forensic investigators. Another execution artifact is prefetch. So prefetch, you know, is stored in the C Windows prefetch directory, .pf files. That random string of letters you see at the end of every executable is actually like a hash of the path. So if you moved iexplore.exe to another folder and you ran it, you'd get another prefetch file. But as long as it keeps running from that same folder, it'll update the prefetch file with the last run time, how many times, what the run count is of that file. And the purpose of prefetch here is you know, designed to speed up the application startup process. You know, it not only gives you the name and the path of the executable, but the purpose of it and how it works is the first 10 seconds after something executes, it watches whatever that program is referencing. And that's not just executables and DLLs, that can be multiple things. So, you know, while the count of how many times something was run is useful in certain cases, this actor's been in this environment a while, he keeps running this thing over and over again. You know, what's really interesting is you have a timestamp to pivot off of. Path and file name, but where you can get an interesting use case for kind of, again, this is more like targeted attack stuff. You know, you get called in for the breach and the client wants to know like 3 things, like how they get in, you know, what did they take or did they take anything, and who are they? That's the hard one, right? So, you know, the what did they take is usually a really important one. The lawyers are almost most interested in that one. And you can sometimes support the case for exfiltration of data by looking at prefetch files, and if say rar.exe was used, like command line rar, or some command line utility, and it was run and then immediately started archiving things, what it archived in the first 10 seconds could show up in prefetch. There's no archives on disk, there's no, you know, nothing else pointing to evidence of exfiltration of data, you know, but that could be your, you know, it's not a smoking gun. It's not really proving that data left the system, but you know, a lot of these companies don't have the right network logs or full PCAP. So 2 things to note: if attacker has admin access, they can just clear out that directory and delete all those things, and you can also carve them out of unallocated if you want to get into the weeds. But they also don't exist on server editions, right? So prefetch is meant to be like a performance enhancer for you know, launching lots of applications. The server usually just runs a few and keeps them running. So you can go enable it on servers. I doubt it's probably that much of an overhead resource, and it could maybe enable forensic investigations in the future. But again, no one does that. So the next artifact is superfetch, and superfetch is, again, another performance enhancement. You know, all these things were not implemented as artifacts to help investigators catch hackers. It were implemented as, you know, performance or usability enhancers. Superfetch is one, kind of like prefetch, you know, in the sense that it watches what's going on, but superfetch is focused on analyzing application utilization patterns. So basically, like, it'll page the memory for those applications at different times based off of when those applications are usually run. So like after like waking from a hibernation or an extended sleep, like what programs do you normally run? Okay, I'll make sure to like be ready to run those. You know, I haven't had the best luck with superfetch during investigations. It's still worth collecting. It's an execution artifact. It's important. But one thing is interesting, it doesn't track from midnight to 6 a.m., so that's when you hack.
Is that local time?
You know what? I assume so, yeah. I don't have that answer for you right now. Good question, actually, right? So on to another area where execution artifacts exist. And I would probably want to be able to cover like nearly all the execution artifacts you can find in Windows, but I'm trying to get to the most important ones. So the end-user dat file is created within the root of each user's profile directory. So C users or C documents and settings, username, into user dat. And it's mapped to the H key, current user registry key. If you ever run regedit, that's what you see. It holds a wealth of information regarding what a specific user account has done on a system. Mostly related to stuff, interaction with the graphical, the Windows GUI, Explorer.exe. You first log in, like say remote desktop or at your keyboard to a system with an account you've never logged in before. The NT-user dat, well, the user folder is created, then the NT-user dat, and then all of the things that, your start menu items, this and that. So you can actually use the NT-user dat's creation time to track lateral movement. If John or Mary logs into this host most days, and then suddenly they start logging into 12 other hosts, that that's probably something you care about, and that's a great way to tell. Of course, they're doing it via command line, that wouldn't work. With this artifact, you have specific to execution, you have the user assist key. Again, this is GUI-based programs launched from the Windows desktop, so you got to be logged in from a graphical session generally, user assist, they're stored in ROT13 in the registry. I don't know why, but they are. There's lots of tools to decode that and see what someone ran during a session. There's also last visited MRU. Anything MRU is most recently used. Again, Windows is really good at remembering like what things you've clicked on and recommending like the same folder you saved a file in last time. It's all about usability. So it's stored here in this registry key, and it basically recently used applications and the last path those applications used to open a file. So common paths, like I mentioned, autocomplete. There's another key called run MRU. Now, this might not necessarily be an execution artifact if someone just typed in C:/ and hit enter. It would just open up the Explorer at the root of C. But if someone types an executable in here, services.msc or anything like, it technically that is an evidence of execution, but it can hold a lot more. So again, running blocks via start menu. The registry so the thing about the registry that's awesome is that every key has a write time associated with it, and you can pivot off that, right? Like I mentioned, everything in forensics and incident response is very focused on not going down too many rabbit holes and spending 6 hours chasing some ghost that was actually not bad, and it was just like HP software that looked like malware. Basically, if you can pivot off a timestamp, it's a huge benefit. So again, registry last write times values in the registry, they can be updated really easily by a program or anything. So they're definitely volatile, I guess, in how modifiable they are. But Windows follows a generally predictable set of actions when it updates certain types of things. So in terms of this artifact, I think it stores the last 10 run values. And if you ever open up the run prompt and you hit the drop down, you see those there, that's where it's loading them from. So there's another one called MUI cache, and this one, again, XP, Vista and on separate locations. When a new application is launched through Explorer.exe, kind of like user assist, Windows queries the version resource of the exe file and extracts the application name, storing it for use later. Another execution artifact. Registry keys associated with it can be useful too. But there's more. These aren't execution artifacts. These are, artifacts that are maybe more related to file opening and saving. So the open save MRU, again, it's what it populates this dropdown. You've probably seen this all over Windows. You just didn't realize it was tracked somewhere. So again, tracks files that have been opened. Really interesting because attackers are usually pretty good about deleting their files off disk. So this can really give you some leads to what's happening. So I'm going to move on to like file-based artifacts now. One thing that's really useful for forensic investigations, more specific to post-mortem forensics when you have a full disk image, is the master file table. It's basically a database of all the files on disk, files and directories for NT file systems, generally what Windows is installed on. And it's meant to track everything related to these files and directories, and it has a whole bunch of stuff, like if you've ever had bad clusters show up, like it has an attribute for that. It has all these attributes, but when, I don't want to get into the weeds of, the structure of the master file table. I want to tell you, what would you care about if you're dealing with a breach related to the master file table? Well, there's some timestamps in there, and these timestamps are, there's 8 of them total, and 4 of them are the standard information attribute timestamps, and 4 of them are the file name timestamps. And then of course there's a file path, and there's records for deleted files that haven't been overwritten. So with the standard information timestamps, those are editable by the Windows Win32 API. So when you right-click a file, or when you just open it up in Explorer and you see like created modified access, those are the 3 timestamps that are exposed to you in Windows for files and folders. Those timestamps are really easily changed. Any program can increment them. You can increment them. While the file name timestamps, you need raw disk read access to increment those, and gotta be a rootkit or something, right? The thing that's interesting though is some of the use cases for trying to find badness related to timestamps in the master file table is with modified, created, and accessed. That's only 3. What was the 4th one for both standard info and file name? That's the entry modified timestamp. So if you change a file name, that doesn't change the contents of the file. If you hash the file, it's still the same, right? So if you change the file name, that's the metadata of the file, and that's the entry modified timestamp. So it's basically the MFT records timestamp of like when it was last changed. Attackers that implement like time stomping, trying to drop a file and then like time stomp it back to 2009 to make it not look like it's in the time frame to you. I think it's less so these days, but if they forget to stomp back the entry modified, that's something you could pivot off of. Again, false positive prone, but something to know. And same thing with the file name timestamp. If you have the entry modified for the file name timestamp being different, something to pivot off of. Again, pretty false positive prone. One other way that you can also attempt to maybe detect time stomping is the master file table stores the timestamps to a millisecond resolution, so 3 digits. And again, people that write time stomping tools that aren't thinking, they'll just stomp them back to zeros. And again, normal files can have 0.000 if a program created it that way, but it's an interesting line of thinking. When you're dealing with incident response and trying to take any lead you can get. If you're going to be doing like live forensics, parsing things in smaller amounts, the master file table is huge. It's hundreds of megabytes, and you're not going to pull that entire thing back to from every system. So if you're going to do something, it'd be parse it for deleted files, and then enumerate what's on disk still, because the master file table, as you see, like has a lot of things in it. So now, one of the Analyze MFT is a tool that I've used for a while, and it actually has flags for this, the millisecond resolution being zeros, or the, entry modified timestamps being, the file name timestamps being much more recent than the standard info. Again, the ones that are really hard to stomp back versus the ones that are easy. So that has flags for those. But one thing that's really important in incident response and forensics is you don't want to always use one tool, because sometimes they have problems. So Maria DeGrazia actually did some awesome analysis a couple years back of the 4 of the more widely used MFT parsers. and these were her findings. So I'll analyze MFT, which I used for a long time, only takes 11 minutes to parse. She found that MFT dump, has more consistent results and also takes less time to parse. It's not open source, so anyway, just word to the wise. If you're going to be parsing these things, post-mortem forensics, like at home or like off a disk image, you've got to try multiple tools to make sure that your results are lining up. So still on the kind of the line of thinking of like file-based artifacts or stuff that was on disk that might no longer be there. Some really useful artifacts include shell bags. So if you plug in a flash drive and you browse like to 6 folders deep, and then you do, copy whatever file you're going to do, and then you just take out the flash drive and burn it. Windows actually has logged the name of every folder that you've gone to, and the name of the flash drive and serial number, amongst other things. And shellbags is actually a really awesome artifact. Again, think graphical, right? Attackers want to blend in. They want to, RDP around. They want to look like your users. You can enumerate what they looked at. This is just a screenshot of Eric Zimmerman, who also writes a lot of great forensics tools. I recommend you check his stuff out. This is his registry explorer, and he's looking at the MRU subkeys. So kind of looks like a mess, and it is, when you look at it this way. But when you get like scripts or tools to parse this stuff out, understanding the data structure is great. Writing the script to parse it yourself is great. I recommend that you all go down that trail one day and understand forensics to that level, but you got to start somewhere, right? So use the tools that are out there and then learn more about them. So basically, when you get tools or scripts that parse out shell bags, it'll end up in basically the exact paths with the created, access, modified times of the folders that were viewed, and straight down to their paths, not files though. Generally. So where this has actually been really useful during an incident was, again, this company was really interested in the exfiltration of data use theory, right? And if we couldn't prove that data left the network, then they were going to be happy, but our job is to report on the facts, not what they want to hear. And what I saw was in the folder Intel on the root of disk, there was a folder created that was called new folder, so it was like control N, and after all was said and done, it's like inside that folder was just recursive folders that enumerated every department of their company, probably with files dumped into them, but again, all I saw was folder artifacts. So very useful artifact. Powerful. The whole purpose of it, again, Windows isn't tracking that to spy on you. If you change from icon to detail view to list view, it remembers that, right? Amongst other things. So index buffers are another one that's also really useful. So each folder within Windows has an index buffer attribute in it. And this is basically how Windows searches things really quickly. So you hit Start menu and you type some things, and you end up getting results back really quickly. It's not because your hard drive's that fast, it's because Windows has built an index. And those index attributes are stored within each directory. They can't all be updated immediately once the file has been deleted. So you can actually get some really good leads off of looking through this data. You can also get a lot of random files too, but it exposes, again, timestamps, all about timeframes in incident response. You're going to sort by created times, modified times. Generally, pro tip, from Vista and on, you don't really look at access time because it's disabled. You can use fsutil.exe in System32 to re-enable access timestamp, but it's been disabled for performance reasons, right? Every time a file is accessed, it has to increment, that attribute in, multiple attributes in the master file table. So they just disabled it. So XP in 2003, Server 2003, it still works, but of course, an antivirus scan or a lot of things can muck it up by just accessing a file. But basically with index buffers, you're going to sort by created time, by modified time, and there's a few other timestamps in there that are also good to pivot off of. So a lot of great leads have come from comparing what's in index buffers and removing what's on disk, and then saying, give me what's there, and oh, these files are worth looking at. So again, I guess everything I just said, right? So NTFS file systems track the contents of folders, creates an index of files on disk, and the exfiltration of data. So I guess where that's been useful is you see if some like file, .7z or .rar in a directory you knew the attacker was using to stage their stuff. That you carve for archives on unallocated, you try to find any other means you can, and you're just not finding anything. But it's like, if that archive was there and it's been deleted, it's probably a good chance that it left the network. We can only make the best case we can with the data that's available. It's almost kind of like just-in-time forensics, and when it comes to incident response, you try to build a story that supports what you're looking at versus, maybe in law enforcement forensics where it's like your story's got to be exact or it can get thrown out. So another really awesome artifact that you should keep track of is link files. So, LNK files, shortcut files. Why do they matter so much? They store a ridiculous amount of data. Not only do they have created modified access time for the link file itself, but they have it for the target file that it's pointing to. And you'd be surprised where in Windows these things are created. As you start clicking through programs or files in Windows Explorer, it starts to create recent file artifacts, and those are all link files. You go launch a program and it shows up at the top of the start menu because you've launched it enough times. That's actually not the program. It's not the executable. It's a link file to it. So again, like I mentioned, the whole NT-user DAT stuff, the creation of, that's evident of a graphical logon generally. After that NT-user DAT creation, you'll see a whole slew of link file creations. You have to learn to ignore those. Yes, it just supports that a graphical logon happened, but then what you do is you see anything that has recent in the path for link files. If you can get all this data in a database and query it and just say, show me anything that's a link file that has recent in the path, bam, you've just looked at everything the attacker was doing through a graphical session. It's actually really powerful. And I've even had success with being able to see browsing to network shares through the Windows Explorer. And you'll see that the link files being created, in recent, like we have here in this path. But on the target file that it's pointing to, everything will start with a backslash, because they're browsing, across the domain or, network shares and stuff like that. So, I've had great success just writing, queries that be like, show me anything that's a link file and starts with 2 backslashes. Bam, all the stuff the attacker did browsing around. So, event logs, there's a lot of stuff going on in event logs. It's a huge mess of data, and it can be hard to sift through, but it's super useful, especially if you can parse it out of unallocated. I know that some of the guys at Mandiant have done great work, behind developing tools for that stuff. And some interesting event IDs, include 4648. So that's a log. Explicit credentials being used. So if you use the run as command, like attacker gets on system, they run mimikatz or some credential dumper, they get a plain text password. What are they going to do with it? Well, they want to now log in as that user, because maybe that user is a domain admin or something. So you can use the run as command or various other ways to say, I might be logged in as this user, but I want to log in as this user with that password. And then Windows is like, okay, now you have those permissions, but it fires off a 4648. So could be useful to look at. Again, there's some noise in there from just normal things in Windows. 4688 is a process creation event. If you have that turned on, it can be really noisy. Every process that fires, logs one of those. And I'm sure if any of you have Splunk servers at, corporate or whatever that you're feeding those into, that kills your license. 592 is the equivalent for XP 2003. 4624s, successful logon. 4625, unsuccessful logon. Logon types are also an important thing. So specific to like logon events, all the security, generally stuff in the security event log is what has these. You'll have a logon type 10. If you're looking at all 4624 events and you're just getting a ridiculous amount of logons, but if you see a logon type 2, that's interactive at the keyboard. Like your client has bigger problems if someone's like hacking them from like inside. So you're going to focus on logon type 3s, network logons, logon type 10s, remote interactive, so remote desktop. There's also service logons and various other things, but generally type 3s and type 10s will be the most useful for you. So there's all sorts of custom event log sources. Back in the day, it was like, security application and system event logs were really the thing. And now you go to like Windows 10 and there's like 150 types of event logs. And so some of those, are really useful. Like the security event log gives you great visibility, like verbose data, the logon codes, the logon types for the authentication events. But I'll see the security event log on domain controllers roll in like, sometimes 3 hours. It's insane, So you can't always rely on that. So when you're doing incident response and you start to poke into these other event logs, I've actually had a lot of success with the Windows Terminal Services Local Session Manager operational log. I've seen this, again, it's not nearly as verbose as a security event log, but it logs the username, I think the source IP, and like one other thing, and then you can also put bookends to the to any activity by an actor because it has the log on and then the log off for the session. So anything that has operational in it, at the end there, generally has been kind of useful in the Windows event logged, the newer ones. So that also includes the local user profile service, amongst some others. So some interesting ways that you can approach hunting for the unknown include aggregating publicly available malware repositories, right? So I've had investigations I've done where we ended up finding some sort of a credential dumper, and via an AMCache entry, had the SHA-1 hash and looked that up on VirusTotal, and oh wow, it was there. Well, if you're able to gather hashes of files, say AMCache hashes, if you hash everything on disk, that's a lot of hashes, and you're going to have a really beefy VirusTotal API key to handle that amount of hashes. But if you hunt smart and you extract, maybe you just hash stuff in shim cache if it's still on disk. You extract the SHA-1 hashes from AMCache. You pick and choose what you want, and you run those against VirusTotal. You might see that there's certain malware signature names that antivirus vendors give some of these tools. And so while dealing with a lot of targeted breaches, I keep seeing these names over again, and some of them will be really generic. It'll say like Trojan.generic. But sometimes if it's Mimikatz, like a few vendors will have like Mimikatz in there. And so as time goes on, you start to see like what are attackers using? I see remote admin a lot, PS exec. That's not bad. It's a sysadmin tool, but attackers use it all the time. So you can actually pivot off those things, and based off of this result key, like say you had this data in a database somewhere, you could query it. And in this case, I've seen risk tool is usually where risk shows up, be a really useful one. Backdoor, gsec dump, pw dump, Mimikatz, Nursoft's pass view. The list goes on, but that's kind of a taste of a way that you can hunt for bad tools. So again, hunting for the unknown and leveraging big data. So in this case, it's not foolproof. If you're really being targeted by a really serious adversary, like some sort of nation state, and your security team is like really cautious and doesn't upload anything they find to VirusTotal as they shouldn't, you're not going to find their tools on VirusTotal likely, but you'd be surprised how much low-hanging fruit's out there and how many breaches I show up to, and it's like, yeah, they were here like a couple years ago, and there were artifacts to prove it, but no one looked. Got to assume compromise, right? So to kind of end this, if you're able to get all the forensic artifacts I've covered, standardized, right, into a database of sorts, timestamp standardized, that's a really important one. It opens up new opportunities for pivoting off of file names, timestamps, hashes, registry keys, whatever, you name it. I've had really good success, having a bunch of artifacts in a database, kind of, uniformly formatted, and searching for something that I found in shim across every other forensic artifact. And then, bam, you get a hit in like the registry, and so you pivot off that, and you have a registry last write time key. So, if you have a capability like maybe an elk stack or something to normalize all this and get it in, you can do things like wildcard timestamps. Show me all activity covering this time frame. Because in forensics, it's not like you've got a one timestamp to go off of, like the current time when logs are showing up, like you do for a seam. In forensics, you've got created time, modified time, access time, registry times, time generated fields for event logs. So again, standardizing timestamps has really helped me, wildcarding timestamps in the standardized, format across multiple forensic artifacts is really useful to pivot off of activity. Because again, you really got to hunt your environment like you're compromised. If you don't, you're going to find out years later that they were there and they left with things. So that's all I got. But I have plenty of time for questions, and you can talk to me after too. Any questions? Information overload. Oh.
So the access line, that also applies to other OSs that develop the access line?
So when you say other OSs, you mean not Windows?
Yeah, like the Macintosh and Linux platforms that they brought up.
Yeah, so it differs on the file system versions for various, I don't know, I haven't done much Mac forensics in my day. But for like NIC systems, at least like EXT, more recent EXTs, it doesn't store the created time. It stores the last access time and the last write time. So again, that's what makes forensics so hard in certain aspects, is because there's so many different file systems across versions. Cool. What's up? So shim cache exists. One thing I didn't mention, which is important, is shim cache is stored, in kernel memory while the system's running, and if you need to shut it down gracefully for it to be written to written to the registry. So that's a graceful restart or shutdown, or else it won't show up. So if you run like shim cache parser or some tool that parses shim cache on a system, that's not targeting kernel memory, you're actually going to miss anything that's happened since the system was last online. Might not be a big deal for a workstation, but for a server that has like an uptime of 300 days, which is the entire scope of the breach, that matters. But that being said, with shim cache, like since it's kernel memory, you can't just go delete it. You'd probably end up blue screening Windows. Someone at FireEye actually wrote a tool to dump shim cache from kernel memory without a graceful shutdown, but you need a signed driver and all that stuff because Windows has those restrictions. So now I've thought of something for like anti-forensics purposes in terms of shim cache, 1,024 entries, right? The last modified time is updated, and if the path is different, it'll probably add a new entry into that 1,024, right? So what if you wrote a tool called like shimbomb that just executed iterations of things 1,024 times? I don't know. It sounds really noisy, but yeah. So that's my contribution to anti-forensics in terms of shim cache. Any other questions?
You mentioned that it was a bad idea to upload things to virus code.
So like on red team engagements, it's pretty standard to watch where our callbacks come from. And if like a callback is like abnormal, like a host name that doesn't match their naming scheme or something, you know, or something just seems off, or just out of habit, hash your attachments you fish with or whatever payloads you have, and just check virus total for them periodically, right? And if they show up there, that means their security team is probably onto you, or they maybe have carbon black auto uploading or something like that. You know, and that usually is an indicator. I'm going to log into the shells I do have, and I'm going to change my persistence. I'm going to change all my TTPs. I'm going to lay low, or I'm going to steal a bunch of stuff because they're kicking me out. Like, you know, so in terms of virus total stuff, yeah, you know, public can look up hashes on it. Public can't download the files, but yeah, that's the thing about virus total is it's a useful tool, but you also have got to understand the risks of uploading things to it. Especially companies that, you know, just have auto upload mechanisms. So, yes.
For the trig match stuff, so if the attacker were to like force an ungraceful reboot or an ungraceful shutdown, then that there's no way to get that.
I think that would prevent it from being written to the system hive of the registry. I haven't poked at them much because, you know, I've only been doing this a handful of years, but there's regback files, so there's like reg backup, but I think those are backups. So that, you know, yeah, blue screening a system or like doing an ungraceful restart might, you know, prevent that from being written. It's also really noisy, you know, so to each their own. But yeah, maybe you can adapt FireEye's tool that like dumps it to like screw it up, although that really sounds like a blue screen to me. All right, yeah.
So it's not a technical question, but when you're contracting to investigate a breach, how willing to help are like the local IT staff? Are they usually pretty willing, or are they kind of like hesitant to let me get the keys to the secret you need?
It's different every company, right? Some IT staff are very, you know, like, these are my servers, right? And they don't want, you know, they're super hesitant to run anything we give them on them. And, you know, and then we're like, well, we need a disk image. Like, I can't shut that down. That's production. It's like, well, if you don't shut that down, the actors are going to be hanging out for a while. You know, it's like, so, yeah, it really varies. And sometimes it takes, you know, C-level, you know, elbow grease to like scare them enough to make them, you know, go, okay, we'll help you with that request. So, yeah, it really varies. Usually IT is more helpful than they are resistant. You know, they want to oust or figure out what these actors did in their environment too, because they want to get better. Mm-hmm. All right, cool. Well, yeah, if you don't have the courage to ask me a question now, I will be back there with. What's up? Hi, Joe. I'll be back there with the 562 crew, so if you want to walk up and ask me anything, feel free. Thanks, guys.